Hello and welcome to the IT Incident Management Development Workshop Summary Outbrief. My name is Dan Vogel. With me is Bob Johnson. We are leading this session as part of the I3P initiative to ensure that the agency-wide NASA process is understood and that we can communicate that to the I3P service providers. The IT Incident Management process was the first in a series of 5 workshops. The other workshops and processes that we did were enterprise service request, problem management, change management, and configuration management. The process is a foundational process based on the ITIL version 3 foundation, and we took liberties as far as what NASA was required to do to ensure that we came up with an agency-wide process suitable for NASA. As I mentioned, we enlisted the help of each of the centers. We had some significant help from everybody involved, and collaboratively we developed a single agency-wide IT incident management process and action plan. Some of the scope that we had with regard to the process was that this process should be suitable across NASA's agency, not just center by center, but agency-wide. The process begins with the identification of an incident, and it closes with the ticket closure. Some of the objectives, again, were to focus on some of the tasks like identification, logging, categorization, prioritization, diagnosis, implementation of service restoration, and closure. During the session, we identified an as-is and a to-be process format. We established some of the categorizations associated with incident management. We looked at foundational level, severity level definitions and examples, performance measures, and we identified an action plan going forward that, even though we came up with some good stuff during this event, we recognized that detailed procedural documentation and other details would have to come out afterwards, and that was all achieved via the action plans.
So what were some of the principles that we had to work by? Obviously, number one in our mind as we got together as a group and before we dove into the process for the workshop was the customer focus. The customer was absolutely number one. As Dan said, we used an ITIL v3 framework that we were going to align all of our activities and tasks related to the IM process with. And we were going to provide enterprise-wide, and it was absolutely key to be on everybody's mind, that it's agency-wide. Today we work in silos within the centers and the missions. There is some agency-wide processes, but we wanted to focus that this particular process is not, and keep in mind that it has to be agency-wide. As Dan also said, all tickets must be logged, all tickets must have ownership, and Tier 1, which is the new Enterprise Service Desk, will manage all incident tickets to closure. So what is an incident? IT service management itself is a discipline for managing information technology centered on the customer's perspective. IT incident management is the process responsible for restoring IT service as quickly as possible following a service interruption or degradation. So it's key to note that, again, an incident is not a fix for an underlying issue, but it is the mission of the incident management process to restore service as quickly as possible. Restoration of service does not imply that other incidents will not happen again. Incident management will utilize a known error database and workarounds provided by the problem management. And we'll talk a little bit about this when you get into problem management. And problem management, again, is the process responsible for performing the root cause analysis and identify the restorations, fix, and known errors. We used an approach for this workshop based on Lean Six Sigma and ITIL, as we said. And they have a pretty good fit together where ITIL is the best practice, if you will, and framework for IT service management, and Six Sigma is how to improve upon quality within your process.
So as Bob mentioned, we use Six Sigma, which is a define, measure, analyze, improve, control type of format. And I think it's recognized that people today, to different degrees, do these processes. So one of the first things we had to do was come to agreement on what we mean by incident management. So Bob walked through the definition. We know that it's restoration of service regardless of how that restoration came to be, whether it's a reboot or duct tape and baling wire. It's not change management. It's not the actual fix. It's not the root cause analysis or actually determining what was underneath the hood causing that error, but it's a raw restoration of service. So as part of that, the team decided we would map out the current as-is process so that we all had an understanding of how the process currently works today. And what you see on the screen here is an example of that. A lot of tasks, a lot of extraneous areas or waste areas. So what we did was we gave stickers to all the participants, and we asked them to identify those areas where the task was value added, where it changed the form, fit, and function of a particular item going through, in this case, incident management. Identify in yellow those areas which are required, but they don't necessarily add value. And then also in red, some of the waste areas. And it's a little difficult to see on this chart, but you can make out a little bit in the lower left and some in the middle of some of those red identified areas.
So the team, as a group, voted on the top 6. Now, I think we identified over 13 different key waste areas here, but we did vote on the top 6, kind of the 80-20 rule. And they were inconsistent closure status notification to the customer, obviously with multiple IM processes, IM processes in place today, there's going to be inconsistency. Configuration item updates not consistent. Need smarter service satisfaction methods. We either had some in some centers or none at other centers. There's multiple disparate service levels or priority levels that exist today. And again, our focus is agency-wide. There's multiple call-in numbers for customers, quite obvious. And there's sometimes manual Tier 1 diagnosis versus automatic diagnosis that can take place. So within these 6, we used a couple of tools out of our Lean Six Sigma tool bag, one being the Ishikawa chart or the fishbone chart that delves into the issues or waste areas, the causes and whys. We took that and related that to what we could do from an action standpoint and from a mitigation standpoint for each one of those issues. And that would be the source of variation matrix we used. And we also brainstormed before we get to the 2B process, all building up to the 2B, if you will, using a pick chart that you may be familiar with. And this, it's kind of small here, but it has 4 quadrants, implement, challenge, kill, and possible. And it all has to do with the benefits and implementation value to NASA. So we did spend a lot of brainstorming time looking at what would be the best areas that we can focus on as we go to the future state.
Now, as part of all this, Bob mentioned those pick chart and all those good ideas. We recognize that certain ideas or certain items have to occur in order for this process to work, and those are identified as critical success factors. These are a couple of them right here, essentially defining the targets to work to as defined in the service level agreements within the contracts. So that's probably rule number 1. We want to ensure that as we build out the process, that our service providers, which are required to align with this process, can actually meet the SLAs that they've bought into. Secondly, customer-oriented and technically trained support staff. So we want to make sure that anytime people call in, they know where to call. They know what to expect. They know that are they going to get a notification back saying, we got the incident and it's documented and here's where it is in the process. And then also interfacing with service provider inputs and outputs. So even though the service providers may not use this incident management system specifically, they are required within the contract to integrate with it. And the ESD's ticket system, okay, it's set up to be Remedy right now, that system will be the system of record for I3P. So it's important that anytime a ticket is entered, that it's either entered directly into the ESD's incident management ticketing system or that there's a link to it. And then on the back end, any kind of updates, any kind of ticket closure is also closed and entered within the ESD's system. what you see now is the first part of the 2B process. So you can hear us talking, pretty animated about the sessions. The people, likewise, were just as animated, and we had a room full of paper. Distilled down is what you see on the next two slides here, which is the 2B incident management process. Across the top, you'll see some of the major categorizations, things like notification, logging, classification, investigation and diagnosis, and then escalation to tiers 2 and 3. But down the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of the swim lanes. So you see that transition between tiers 1, which is very heavy on this page, versus tier 2, 3, which is going to be on the next page. So how the process works is an incident can be identified by just about anybody. It could come in from a user. It could come in from tier 2, 3 support. So for example, a security patch might come in that way. And then event generation. We might see degradation in service associated with network or systems monitoring, which would fire off an incident ticket to the ESD. Tier 1 is the ESD, and they would pick up that information and they'd say, okay, let me make sure I have your user information correct. Let me shoot you back a reply saying, I got your ticket. They document the issue. They identify a category, type, and item. That's going to help us route it to the right teams for service. And then they're going to check for things like known errors. So say Dan Vogel calls in. Well, Bob Johnson called in about the same thing a little while ago. That should all be documented. So that way we're not sending multiple teams out performing the same kind of incident management support. I think, unfortunately, that's what has to be happening today, given everybody does this independently at each of the centers. So there is a good deal of leverage that can go on. If it's not an incident, if it's a service request or it's a non-incident event, it can get routed to another team or another system for support. But at least this way, all tickets coming in have a single point of contact for incident management. If there is available information, that could be handled either with a script or manual diagnosis just to ensure that service is restored. This would be if there's enough information for the tier 1 folks to actually restore the service or get that client back up and running. If they can't, then they're going to have to escalate it to tiers 2, 3. They'll send the customer an update saying we're still on it. We can't fix it right now on the phone, but we are going to support the call going forward. On the next page, this is where we get that jump to tiers 2 and 3, which essentially are the service providers. And you'll see that in the grayed out box under that tier 2, 3 line. And essentially what that means is we have a good idea of what's happening with incident management at the tier 2, 3 level. We cannot dictate exactly what their process is going to be. I think a lot of the service providers have built up their processes over time, so they're reluctant to forfeit those because they know they work. But we identified the things that we think are going to occur there just so we can have the proper into and out of the proper integration, let's say, between our systems and their systems. So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to get that ticket. They're going to say, is this the right group or not? They might have to reassign it. They may say, no, that is me, and in which case they're going to do some investigation, diagnosis, and restoration work. If the system is restored, they're going to update the ticket. They're going to set it at pending closure or something of that nature, and they're going to send an update to the ESD. If it's not closed, if they're not able to restore it and they think they need additional tier 2, 3 support, that's going to come back to service restoration and a little bit of hierarchical and functional escalation to other teams. You're going to see that probably happening via the ESD. Here we say it's an external process just because it's, it's a separate escalation channel. They are not the ones that are going to be the closers of the ticket. Okay, they can set the ticket to pending closure, but the ESD is the one that needs to contact the customer base, ensure that the customer was satisfied with that issue, and then finalize the incident documents and ultimately close the ticket. If they realize that the customer wasn't satisfied, then again, they can escalate. But ultimately, the service provider isn't the one that closes the ticket. They provide all the information. They do a lot of the work, certainly, but it's the ESD that's going to have to contact the customer and validate that the customer was satisfied. Once everything gets closed, then we'll have output to problem management for assessment of all the incidents going forward. Hey, we got 1,000 incidents associated with point X. Let's do some problem analysis. Let's do some root cause analysis to figure out what that issue might be. We'll go into continual service improvement to ensure that we're consistently improving the incident management process, and then ultimately we'll do a customer survey to ensure that the customers are getting their needs fulfilled on an ongoing basis.
So Dan talked earlier about some of the things that had to be done in that workflow the process flow that we just went through, and one was categorization. The team had a couple of decisions to make. One was the approach of what type of categorization approach we wanted to take. And we did decide, and the team recommended a CTI type of approach. And if you look at the example here, they're a pretty common approach that's being used by lots of different vendors. It breaks things down by category and then to subcategories within that category. Some examples are database, Oracle, and upgrade. Now, we do realize that this translates to remedy in a different fashion. They call it OPRs, but it still flows very well with this type of approach, kind of a hierarchical approach for categorization. This is absolutely key to get the CIs and relationships built into single service attributes that equal incidents. And these have to be consistent. So a very, very important area when it comes to activities with the enterprise service desk.
So essentially that's all the meat of how things get routed functionally from team to team, right?
Good point. So if something equals a particular CTI, then it would go to, as Dan said, the Tier 2 and Tier 3 resolver groups specifically assigned to that CTI. And also the known error database would be approached based on that CTI. The severity levels, absolutely, again, are key. And you can call them priority levels or severity levels. They're related to SLAs on different service areas. In our particular case, I3P, it's going to be 5 different service SLAs. And you're talking about mean time to repair. So for a particular severity level, based on impact and urgency to NASA, what is the mean time to repair time to get that incident up and working, again, to get that back in place, back in service. So typically, and this is what the team came up with, was an overview baseline of 4 different severity levels that we should strive for. And this is being worked right now. You'll see it when we get to the activity plans by the ESD to try to meet this. But the severity levels, again, the key part here is that they should be based on urgency and impact and should be reevaluated to meet that particular criteria. In this case, we have examples. There are backup slides that you will see posted on the websites that gets a little bit more deeper into what the teams did in this particular workshop for severity levels.
What you see on the screen now is what's referred to as a RACI matrix. It's a role responsibility matrix where we take the specific tasks of a process, which you see across the top here, the incident management tasks, and align them with some of the roles within the environment. In this case, it was a little bit high level just because some of the process roles or some of the roles within the environment in the service office in particular aren't very well defined. We still have to identify the individuals. We still have to identify some of the accountability and responsibilities there. But the team took a good crack at the first cut of this. So what you see on the screen are anytime an individual or a role is responsible or participates in any way with a task, they get a certain annotation associated with it. So if you see an A, of which you will only see one A typically per function or per task, that individual or that team are accountable. And that means they ultimately own that particular task. The R means responsible, and those individuals you'll probably see a many one-to-many relationship there, where many people will have some kind of work that they do in relation to that task. So that's what the responsible means. Consulted would be that individual is contacted, asked to provide input with regard to the task, and then likewise, some people are just informed on particular tasks. So for example, when we close tickets, IT management might just be informed. They don't really have a say or participate in the process directly, but they need to be aware of what's going on. On this slide, we see performance measurement. And Bob and I and the team are big believers in performance measurement. There's one thing to say, this is the work that we do, and these are the individuals that do the work, but on an ongoing basis, we also need to know how well are we doing what we do, so that way we can identify opportunities for improvement. And what we did here was we looked at some of the common business objectives. We did that by stakeholder, key behaviors, et cetera. We looked at some of the compliance issues, things like agency versus IT strategies. We looked at maturity levels, operational and service level agreements, and then also we looked at the operational excellence components, things like measurement, control, cost efficiency, et cetera. And we identified a key set of metrics which are really appropriate for incident management. Now, there's certain things that can be measured early on. This is page 1 of 2. But all these measures, you have to look at it in relation to the maturity of the environment. So there's certain things, incidents as a result of changes, okay, because I think we know that change is the prime cause of pain within the operational environment. That's a difficult measure to identify, and it's a difficult measure to capture. So maybe that's something we need to think of as a level 5 maturity. But initially, certainly things like first call resolution rate, or time to restore by severity, or number of incidents by type, those are real core, very initial metrics associated with incident management. And we encourage the teams essentially to really spend a lot of time identifying what those things should be and ensuring that we've got them built into the process. On the second slide here, you'll see some additional ones, things like percentage of incidents that were reopened, or percentage of incidents which are incorrectly assigned. And again, that's a next level of maturity where those things are going to help us identify, is the process working the way we think it should be? Are people following the process the way we think they should be? Are the tools set up to facilitate that? So again, think of a huge list of metrics that we could potentially have. Think about where we are currently in what level of maturity we're at. What are we capable of doing now? And what should we be capable of doing in the future? So this is a pretty good starting list of those measures. And I think all the ESD tools, all of the common tools for incident management support these measurements.
We did take a look at risk also, which is absolutely key when you implement a new process. These risks, however, are confidential at this time because of the procurement environment that we're in. We did assign owners, we did assign dates, and they are actively being worked.
We followed the common NASA model of impact and urgency, the five-box model. So
we spent a lot of time on risk, and they can be available, but certainly not in this open forum. From an activity standpoint, we can't accomplish everything in the 4 total dedicated days that we had with this team. We did a lot, but we did have additional activities that have to take place post-workshop, and these are the ones that we identified. Key, as I said, the first one is severity and priority levels. I told you it was pretty critical, along with the second one, which is CTI development. These have been handed over with help and guidance from the team and the SIM to the Enterprise Service Desk for ownership. They are actively being worked right now. A lot of these have to do with aligning what's in the technology part, the tool, if you will, to the actual requirements from NASA. So these are actively being worked now by the ESD. The third one is configuration management database. Again, this is owned by the ESD for all the right reasons. The actual database for the configuration items, which equal services, which equal CTIs, if you will, are all within the ESD tool, and that's the Remedy tool, version 7.5, as Dan said. Customer satisfaction plan is being worked. It's almost completely done, but again, that's got to be integrated with the tool, and the target date is going to be December, and that's owned right now by ESD and Mr. Bob Deal. The definition acronym list that was done, that's been posted on the SIM site. Performance measurements, that's ongoing with all of these processes. The ones that Dan showed you are the top 20, if you will, that were identified by our workshop team. But we do have other professionals taking a look at specific performance measurements based on maturity, as Dan said, and where they would be needed and when to implement those. The documentation or the process flow, that's what we showed you. That was complete almost a year ago, December 2009.
So what you see on this page is the completion report. So you have a group of good-looking people up there on the right. Those are all the attendees of the session. You should recognize a lot of those folks as being some of the center integration leads within the centers. Everybody was great. Everybody committed 100% of their time. And actually, the team found it so successful that I think virtually 90%, 95% attended each of the 5 sessions. So there was consistency from process workshop to process workshop. So a couple of things that we used to do, we used to be very focused on, my service desk or my help desk, and this was my incident management process. So a couple of the changes that we made were we came up with a single agency-wide incident management process. We identified some key agency-wide incident management roles, and I think the team spent some time building those out. We identified key performance measures. The action plan we came up with during the session, we worked to. People were assigned, dates were assigned, and we've been keeping up on that. And then the way we're going to do it in the future is that we're adding additional development workshops as we go so that we were able to integrate all these processes together so that I3P and our service providers know exactly what's expected of them, and then we likewise know how to work with the service providers both from a manual process perspective, but also from a technology perspective. We'll continue these center-level outbriefs as required. If you find you need a specific technical interpretation of this workshop or this outbrief, please feel free to give us a call. We'll be happy to do that. Thank you very much for your time today, and please feel free to call us with any questions that you have.
Thank you.